Okay, welcome to this lecture on information systems. This is a re-recording of the lecture that we had in the afternoon. Unfortunately, I couldn't upload that video because the file was too large. Apparently, Moodle only takes very short videos. So I'm going to summarize the most important points, but I'll also upload the PowerPoint slides on Moodle. So what is the objective of this lesson? By the end of the lecture, you must be in a position to define what an information systems, as well as identify the different components of an information systems. I'm not going to go through the recap of what we covered last week as I did in the lecture, for the simple reason that, the video might be too long if I do that. Okay, so now where do information systems fall within the whole spectrum of business functions? Information systems provide vital support for integrating internal business processes, cutting across functional lines and integrating the operations of the business and its customers and suppliers. If you remember from last week, we made a distinction between between business functions and business processes. And we said business processes, these are the collection of activities that take inputs to produce outputs of value to a customer. For instance, when you want to buy a cell phone, the whole process of getting a cell phone, to a shop like say MTN or GAM or wherever it is that you buy your cell phone, you need to go through different processes. For instance, the production department needs to work with suppliers and information has to filter between these two. They have to work with the accounting and finance to get the financial resources. They have to work with marketing in order for marketing to promote the cell phone. All right. But before we get into what information systems really are, we need to define what information is. Information refers to data that has been processed. It is any form of communication that provides understandable and useful knowledge to the person receiving it. So in other words, data in and of itself means nothing. It has to be understandable to the one who is receiving it. It's for instance, I could get data from, say, an engineer, but because I'm not an engineer, it might not mean anything to me, or I might not even understand it. Therefore, it's not information to me. It only becomes information when it's understandable to the one who is receiving it. What is then the difference between information and data? I'll give you an example. Let's say you want to know how well you are performing in one of your foundation modules, such as Economics 1 CO. And so far, you've written about 2 tests. In the first test, you've probably got 3 questions wrong. And the second test, you got 4 questions wrong. These questions that you got wrong, these are your data. The unprocessed facts. What you really want to know is your final score. What did you get for economics for the first test or the second test? Did you pass? And we know that you got 70% for test 1 and 60% for test 2. These two numbers are the statistics. These statistics are the information, right? That is the data that has been processed from 10. If we subtract 3 questions, we get 7 out of 10, which as a percentage is 70%. Knowing the questions that you missed, therefore, simply gave you some data that you could use to calculate your final score. All right, I hope that is clear. So now what are information systems? Information systems are the interrelated components which work together to collect, process, store, and disseminate information to support decision-making within an organization, coordination and control of the business functions, as well as analysis and visualization. Information systems should not be confused with information technology. Why? Because information systems are more than information technology. They do use information technology, such as computers, as tools for storing information and processing information. Therefore, we can say that information technology is a component of information system. Within an organization, information systems can serve three roles. The first role is to support business processes, which I think I have explained when we defined what information systems are. They can also be used to support decision making or to support strategies for competitive advantage. All right, let's give an example of of how information systems can be used to support decision making. Let's take, for example, an HR department. The HR department must have a database with information relating to all its employees, including age, race, gender, qualifications, how they are remunerated, and so on. Let's take age, for example. With age, the HR department might use that information in the database on age to see or to project, uh, like for instance, what proportion of staff might be nearing retirement and whether they need to start recruiting new staff to replace staff that might be going on retirement. They might also use the same information, for instance, to determine, whether there is equity within the organization in terms of maybe say gender equity, racial equity, and so on. Over the years, information systems have also, the role of information systems has also evolved. In the early 1950s to the 1960s, the focus was mainly on reporting and data processing, but it has evolved over the years to include decision making, as well as now we are in an era of e-commerce. What do we mean by e-commerce? An example of e-commerce, you can simply sit behind your computer now and do all your transactions. You don't need to go physically to a shop to purchase anything. Like you can even buy groceries. Whoever thought it would be possible to just sit at your home, buy your groceries, and your groceries are delivered at home. That is just one example of e-commerce. Actually, e-commerce is broader than the example that I've given you. So what are some of the components of information systems? Remember, we said information systems are not information technology, but information technology is a component of information systems. Therefore, some of the components of information systems are the hardware, software, the data, and the people. All right, so hardware and software, now we're talking about the computers. The data, it needs to be inputted into the computers, and the people, obviously, without people, information systems cannot perform their role within an organization. In terms of hardware, we know that there are three components to hardware. There's the input, the data that you put into the computer, which is then processed, and processing is simply a system of transforming and manipulating information, taking the inputted data and converting it into something useful. For instance, I can take all the marks of maybe say how students performed on test one. You put them into my Excel spreadsheet and calculate the average, what was the average mark, calculate the pass rate, what proportion of students passed test one and passed test two. All right, and then output now refers to the processed information. Maybe I will generate a report on student performance for test one. Okay, so now hardware, in other words, it simply refers to the physical components of a computer, like your keyboard, which is one input device, your monitor, which is an output device, or your central processing unit, which is, your processing device. Another example of the hardware, you've got speakers, you've got the screen or the monitor, the monitor, you've got the mouse, microphones. All these are examples of computer hardware. Software, these are the instructions that tell the physical components of a computer what to do, right? For those of you who might want to do programming, it's like that's software, that's what you'll be dealing with. So instructions, there are two types of software. There's your operating software, which is the system which interacts with the hardware of the computer, such as your Microsoft Windows on your laptop, your Android or your iOS systems on your Samsung phone or your iPhone. Without your Android system, your Samsung phone cannot work. Even if you can't even download applications such as WhatsApp on a cell phone that hasn't have that operating software, which is your Android software. And then we have application software, which is the software which interacts with the user, like your MS Word on your computer, your WhatsApp, so on. System software, these are some of the examples of system software. Examples like your Windows, the different versions of Windows, Linux. You find that maybe your Apple laptop also has its own software like your iOS. Examples of application software, your Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, all these other apps that you have on your cell phone, they are an example of application software, the software that you as the user actually interacts with. Now with data, I've already, I think, explained in the example what data is. This is simply raw facts and figures that have not been transformed into something useful, which alone also do not tell you anything, and they only become information when presented in a context so that it can answer a question or support decision making. But if we go back to the example that I gave of you, wanting to know how you're performing on Econ 1D, or you'll find that outside the context of whether you're passing a module or not, that data, that information is actually meaningless. If I were to give someone random, maybe go to a hospital and give a doctor that information, it doesn't mean anything. But to me as your lecturer, it means something because it tells me that you have passed your module. You've passed your assessments rather. And then lastly, it's people. And here we are just simply referring to the users of information systems. Okay, so, and these users can be found at all levels of a business. I think these days, almost everyone in whatever form of business they're doing use a computer in one way or another. And there are some professions or some roles which are peculiar to information systems, such as your database administrators, your data analysts, and your financial analysts. All right, so that's all from me today. See you for the next lecture, which focuses on transaction processing systems. If you have any questions, don't remember to send me emails. All right, bye-bye.